Good evening, Bill. Welcome to the DMZ.
So you're already working in the title, Ed. You're smoother than me.
Well, I think we need to come up with. Remember, we used to do from the right, I'm Matt Lewis, from the left, I'm Bill Scher, and you're watching the Weekend Blog. We need to do something like you're about to enter the DMZ, something like that. Yeah, I do like the name. I'm glad. The name is growing on me. Not that I didn't like it before, but living with it, I'm liking it.
It's part of you now.
Settling nicely. I'll put it that way.
Well, this has been, I think, a week of great polarization in the nation. This might test our bond.
I don't think so. I think that it is in times like this, times of national crisis, when we are needed most. This is we're like Major League Baseball during the Great Depression. We're where you go during times of crisis. So I think this is going to be a uniting experience. And let's kick it off. I would say, without a doubt, I think, well, maybe not, but arguably the most divisive issue has been the Trayvon versus, is it George Zimmerman?
Yeah, George Zimmerman.
Sort of case, which, well, why don't you kick it off? I've got thoughts about it. My thoughts are kind of nuanced, actually, and I suspect yours are as well.
Well, to some degree. I mean, I think I'm a little bit different than maybe folks on the left and the right. I tend not to get caught up in these crime stories where you only get dribs or drabs of information. Because I always feel like, we have a judicial process, we have a system where we air out all the facts, and so I'm not constitutionally inclined to get ahead of the story. Having said that, there obviously was value in this case for people who don't have my outlook,
right,
who don't have my tendency.
Well, and the problem, too, is that since there was no arrest, there is no more information. I mean, in other words, had Trayvon's defenders not raised a fuss over this, it's not like more information would have come out because
right,
George Zimmerman was not arrested, and so I guess it would have gone away.
Right.
So it's not like a normal It's not like a normal court case.
Exactly. So I'm certainly not knocking those who have, successfully, kicked up the dust and gotten folks to look at this. And, it's the kind of story that certainly gets the left, very focused. Anytime there is an incident that reminds folks that it's not all kumbaya, we haven't solved all of the race problems in the nation, even with the election of Barack Obama, it's not all put behind us. I think there's always been a fear with every civil rights movement, social justice movement on the left, that after you get a degree of success, the fear that people will quickly say problem solved, and then progress doesn't keep moving forward. So there's an interest in holding stories like this up to light to say, hey, there's still a problem here, and it's not just that's one guy who had an itchy trigger finger. It's also that there seems to have been a institutional cover-up in the local police department that's sort of inexplicable. And so that's sort of where the thrust of the story comes from on the left. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Matt, but it seems to be on the right. The default position is, why are you looking at this through a racial lens at all? Why should President Obama talk about the fact that this person could have, if he had a son who would have looked like him? This was just as bad a story if it was a white person shot than a black person shot. And from the liberals' perspective, it's, well, that you're missing the point of the outrage here. The point is that there's a preponderance of evidence that it's not just that he was possibly shot wrongfully, killed wrongfully, but that race had an element to do with it too, based on what transcripts that we have. And there's not a great epidemic of white people being shot in this manner to suggest that there is a colorblind aspect to this. But that's where I think this gets very divisive.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of issues that this brings up. I'll go through a few of them. Number one, I think the question over this stand your ground rule or law. I mean, right. I definitely, there's one that's called like King of Your Castle or something like that, which I completely agree. If someone breaks into your home, you should have every right to shoot them. The bigger question, though, is out on the street, if someone is coming at you as a citizen, should you have a responsibility to attempt to retreat, or should you just be able to stand there and, if necessary, shoot them if you get into a fight? I mean, it seems like it's very clear to me that you should be allowed to shoot somebody who comes into your house. It's much less clear to me that as a citizen, you shouldn't attempt to retreat. So that's one issue. And that's why George Zimmerman was not arrested, because of that law. And I think it would have been better if he had been arrested, if there was a different... I mean, I think the police officers were probably acting according to the law. But
I don't even understand why that law should have been reason to not have an arrest. It might be a reason for him to get off. But why should the police officer simply presume all of the surrounding aspects of the case? Why should the police officer is not the judge? So I don't get why that should be a factor in their thinking.
But I mean, the police. I don't think we want to live in a world where the police can arrest you if you haven't committed a crime. I mean, to me, the fault lies in the law. But it would have been better, I think, for everybody had he been arrested, and then, as you said during the beginning of our conversation, then we could all, shut up and quit like second guessing this, and we could say, well, let's let it play out in the court. A couple other points to make, and then I'll toss it back to you. I do think that some on the left were very irresponsible and immediately painting Trayvon as a complete hero and George Zimmerman as the complete villain. Sharpton, Jackson, the usual suspects, who I think do more harm than good and are more divisive, certainly, than they are uniters. And then the worst example being Spike Lee, who retweeted what he thought was the address for George Zimmerman, which I think is abhorrent. I mean, what is the notion? Why on earth would you retweet this guy's address unless you wanted people to go to his house and seek some sort of vigilante justice against him? And then it turns out he retweeted the wrong address, and now he's being sued by an older couple who have had to abandon their apartment and live in a hotel. And the last point I'll make is simply to say what I think probably happened, without knowing all the facts, of course, is I do tend to believe that nobody's heroic here. I think that probably what happened is this guy George Zimmerman, first of all, a little bit too concerned about his community. I know that we try to encourage people in this society that if you see something, say something, or to be involved. I'm not that involved in my community. If I saw something suspicious, I would maybe call the cops. What I would not do is follow...
That's something. That's not nothing.
I would not... Well, but I would not follow somebody and attempt to apprehend them or keep an eye, I mean, I would just call the cops, and that would be the extent of it. It seems a little weird to me, and apparently this dude has made 40 phone... What I'm hearing from media reports, he's made many, many calls to the police. This guy has a little bit too much time on his hands, if you ask me. My guess is Trayvon's walking through this, I guess, gated community, and he's not doing anything wrong. And my guess is this George Zimmerman guy, who actually is Hispanic, and if his name was Jorge Martinez, I think that the media spin would have been different. but his name is George Zimmerman. So I think this guy has a little bit too much time on his hands, and he probably approached Trayvon, and Trayvon probably gave him an attitude. It was like, well, why are you coming up? Why are you hassling me? And I think Trayvon probably did push him or physically. Apparently, according to what I'm hearing from the police, George Zimmerman had like a broken nose, had some other, something with his head. And then I think that it spiraled out of control. I think it was just two guys who both probably were partially at fault. And I think it's just a very, very sad situation that could have been avoided. Obviously, Trayvon is unarmed. He's like carrying Skittles. And I think it is just an utter shame that this has been exploited by some people on both sides and has become like so divisive and has torn Americans apart.
I just want to press on a couple of points there. I totally agree. I don't endorse any kind of attempt at vigilante revenge on Zimmerman. I mean, the whole point from on the left on this is that, to the point of the stand your ground law, is that maybe we shouldn't be having laws that encourage vigilante justice, because that might lead to unnecessary deaths. So I wouldn't concur with anything that points in that direction. But we have seen the last couple of days a lot of stuff on the right, and most probably from the Drudge Report, pushing forth negative information about Trayvon, whether it's substantiated or not, we don't know. Saying that he smoked marijuana, and there was even like a false photo being passed around through chain email to make him look like kind of a gangster. And I feel like the point of the left is not to say that he is a saint. We don't know anything about this guy, but that he certainly wasn't doing anything, or at least the presumption is he wasn't doing anything to warrant being killed. And so why are there, and I'm not blaming you for this, Matt, but why are there any folks on the right finding it an interest in maligning the dead person? What's the point of doing that?
I think that this is one of those cases where it is tribalism, and it has become you pick your side. When I actually think that the truth is in between. I think that it was a very sad and unfortunate confluence of events, including a bad law, probably an overzealous person who cared maybe a little bit too deeply about his neighborhood, maybe another kid who resented being followed, and did, I think, probably, got physical. And I think that what happens is, this is sort of, I'm sure both sides are guilty of this, but this is something that conservatives fall prey to all the time, which is they will rush to the defense of somebody that they think is being maligned unfairly. And sometimes that person doesn't deserve the defense. But it's like an enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. So, we saw it with like Juan Williams, where he became, for a brief moment, like a champion of the right because NPR had wronged him. And I think that the left, I think, we're first to try to cast George Zimmerman as the complete villain and Trayvon as the complete angel. And I think that they were really stirring up dissent and acrimony. And I think that the right sort of reflexively took the exact opposite position of that in order to push back. And I do think that Trayvon actually, I don't think this is rumor, I think he actually was expelled from school when this incident occurred because he had a bag found that had some marijuana residue on it. That doesn't mean he should be killed or even mean that I don't think it means he's even like a bad person, but it does poke some holes in this image that was initially put out that he is some sort of like angelic figure who was, being held up as, this heroic, complete victim. Where my guess is that it's a little mixture of of everybody kind of behaving badly, and a lot of just sort of a series of unfortunate incidents, including the police, probably dropping the ball a little bit, and it's just very, very, very sad. Now, there was a picture. This gets a little bit confusing because I think that I think there were a couple things at play. One, I think the pictures that initially surfaced of Trayvon are old, and they made him look like much younger and much more sort of angelic. There was a blogger who I think made him look darker skinned, which I'm not sure what's up with that or why that would happen. Then there was another guy with the same name, another Trayvon in Georgia, that some blogger, I think, or somebody on the right used his picture. I think that what's it called? Twitchy, the new Michelle Malkin website, actually had that picture up. It was sort of a gangster pose from a different Trayvon. And for a while, people confused the two, which is horrible. And I think that Twitchy, I believe, sort of apologized for that case of mistaken identity. So this thing is, there's just so many things, aspects to it.
I mean, is there anything on the right at the moment that is introspective and saying, a lot of folks at the state level have been pushing these stand your ground laws, and maybe this is not an important law to have on the books. You have the general right to self-defense anyway. Why do you need a law like this that sort of spells out you can use deadly force if you so choose? You have the personal leeway to decide when to use deadly force. Is that really a law that is necessary to keep us safe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if anyone has explored that. I think it's worth exploring. I will say that Doug Mataconis at Below the Beltway, who's sort of a libertarian blogger, has, I think, been the most eloquent and sort of responsible. He's written some very good posts sort of saying, I would say essentially making the argument that I've made today, which is that we don't know what happened. We don't know all the details. There's a lot of people, the race baiters on the left deserve our scorn, but there are people on the right who have done things that are, not good as well. And so check that out. It's Below the Beltway, Doug Mataconis. He's written some pretty good stuff. I think, if more people had taken his tack, we would have been much better off.
Well, the other major divisive subject this week is healthcare, and you saw those dividing lines in bright colors on the Supreme Court itself, since we got to hear the audio, which you don't always get to hear. But the preponderance of the commentary is that the individual mandate provision in the law certainly seems to be under serious consideration to be struck down by a majority of the court, even if it's not a done deal. The CNN's Jeffrey Toobin certainly influenced a lot of commentary by saying very quickly they thought it was as good as dead. Although I think if you look at the entirety of the transcript, it's a much more muddled picture. But I know on the left, it seemed to dredge up old wounds from the original healthcare debate, and latent anger that doesn't have a public option, or anyway, they didn't go for single payer. Because in the court hearings, you had the conservative justice, the justice and the lawyers saying, sure, if you want to tax everybody to pay for healthcare, that's totally fine, totally constitutional. If you want to have a giant bureaucracy, sure, that's completely under the governmental powers. And so some folks were on the left were kind of crowing, oh, well, you should have done that, you wouldn't have any of these problems. Although I think that certainly obscures the question whether you could have gotten that passed from Congress in the first place. And there's a lot of guffawing at the performance of Obama's Solicitor General, saying it was a weak performance and he let everybody down and whatnot. But this is my own take on that. If I may chew up a couple more minutes, I don't think it was so much that he did a bad job. It's that his argument was not hitting the target of what Kennedy and Roberts wanted. To put a fine point on that, Kennedy was basically asking the Solicitor General, tell me what the Commerce Clause line is. And for folks who aren't immersed in this stuff, I mean, one of the issues at play is, does Congress have the power under the Commerce Clause, the clause of the Constitution that says that Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce? Right. It's a long, this is the limiting debate.
Limiting principle is what
that's Kennedy's phrase.
Right.
The question: is there a limiting principle? It is the simplest version of this debate that's going on for a long time is the conservative view is this is just literally about regulating trade between the states, and it doesn't go beyond that. And the liberal view has been commerce can be very broadly interpreted, and so forth. You can hang a lot of different policy goals on that, such as the Civil Rights Act, for example. And Kennedy was saying we need to have some kind of line, so the government can't just use it for everything. And he's asking the Solicitor General, tell me what that line should be.
Right.
And the Solicitor General's point is that it's not our place to really draw that line. One, there's some very unique aspects of the healthcare market that don't apply to these other hypotheticals that you're raising. Can the government make you eat broccoli or make you buy cell phones and whatnot? But push comes to shove, he says at the very end, based on other Supreme Court precedent, the judicial branch should defer to Congress, the democratically elected branch, to interpret that. And it's not your job to draw a bright line, what's in or what's out as far as that power is concerned. So you could say maybe it was a bad strategic choice of the Solicitor General to pursue that line. But I think that's where the two of them were kind of talking past each other a lot. And that may not matter at the end of the day. Kennedy could go off and write his own line, even though the Solicitor General didn't spell it out for him. So it doesn't necessarily ensure that the case is lost. I think that's why the exchange looks so weird from the vantage point of the audience.
Well, I think you're totally right that, I think it's a huge mistake to assume that because the questioning seemed to favor overturning the individual mandate that that's what's going to happen. We've been talking about this for years. I do tend to agree with Kennedy's line of questioning, which is that it does strike me that if the government can tell you have to purchase health insurance, what can't they tell you have to do? And, what can't government use coercive power to force you to do? Bless you. Are you sneezing? And then lastly, I would just say that, the notion that Congress should sort of police themselves, that's, to me, separation of powers this is what the court is supposed to do, which is to determine if what the other branch of government or branches of government do is constitutional. And so
he wasn't quite being that loose with it, but he was saying that if there is a plausible argument to be made, even if it's a debatable point, that therefore you should defer to Congress on that point. It's not the judicial branch's role to get in the middle of that debate. Let the Democratic elected branch resolve that debate.
Well, there has been some interesting political commentary on this. The Washington Post, The Fix, essentially argued that this is if you win, you lose, and if you lose, you win. And James Carville, I think, said the same thing the other day, I think on CNN, where if Obamacare were completely overturned, I agree. I actually think it would help Democrats Like to me, that's not a good reason not to do it. Right. But it does strike me that now, look, if the individual mandate's overturned, but pre-existing condition stays, then it's muddy. But if the whole thing is overturned, I think that it helps Democrats because the other side, the side that feels like they've been screwed by the court, whether it's conservatives after Roe versus Wade or Democrats after, Bush gets the presidency in 2000, the side that feels aggrieved and, screwed over by the court tends to have, there's a backlash. And so I think Carville is right. What do you think, though?
I wouldn't take the argument that far. I'm more of the view that it is probably a non-factor either way as far as the election is concerned.
Right. Well, let me just say my point isn't just about this presidential election. Mm-hmm. I think so in other words, if it were overturned, I don't think that means Obama wins.
Right.
But I think that the backlash could actually last for years. This is a landmark case.
We have an historical example of this. We have what happened with FDR. I mean, FDR had key planks of the New Deal overturned by the court during his first term. FDR, lit into them afterwards. There's a famous horse and buggy press conference that he gave where he sort of mocked the court for wanting to take us back to the horse and buggy days. But my understanding is that those issues weren't what were determinative come election day. The people reelected FDR because the economy was perceived as doing better. But then at that point, when he had this big mandate, he just on his reelection, he decided to use it to pack the court and get them off his back once and for all. And there was a huge backlash to that. That really sapped his political capital, FDR's political capital in the second term, and he obviously wasn't able to do it. I find judicial issues tend to be, not zeroed in on by the public unless something. I think power grabs tend to be bristled at. And so obviously FDR suffered backlash for that.
And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I would say, like Roe versus Wade, it's not completely analogous to this, of course, but liberals won. But I think that ushered in a generation of conservatism. The backlash against that lasted for decades. And
there obviously was a backlash that has simmered for a very long time. But right. I don't think Reagan was elected because of that. Reagan was elected because the inflation was through the roof and the hostage crisis was unabated predominantly.
I think it was many factors, and I think that was one of them. Because you saw for the first time evangelicals become political, and Reagan was really able to. Reagan tapped into that the Christian conservative thing, and the Christian Coalition, of course, came along later. But I think that this is a landmark case. I mean, as you know, this has been something. Universal health coverage has been something that Democrats, especially, but I mean, even Theodore Roosevelt, I think, pushed for it. But Democrats, since Harry Truman, have pushed for this. And if it is now overturned by the court in a 5-4 decision, let's say, they're going to be pissed off. And I think that's going to motivate, we've got to, all of a sudden now the next election is the most important election because we get one more Supreme Court justice, during the next term, if somebody retires, we can't, it becomes huge. The stakes become even huger.
Well, there's some indication that neither Roberts nor Kennedy want to create that kind of backlash dynamic. They're not looking for a deeply ideological 5-4 decision if they can avoid it. We don't know. I mean, it's all speculation. But you take what Kennedy said at the very end of the Tuesday arguments, where he basically says, I do think that healthcare is a unique market, and therefore perhaps deserves to be under the Commerce Clause umbrella. But he doesn't want to. But he doesn't want a situation where the government says this one's unique and the next one's unique and the next one's unique and the next one's unique. So if Kennedy can come up with the limiting principle, I mean, so conservatives have been saying, well, if you do this, what about that? Well, if you make me buy healthcare, you're going to make me buy broccoli. What if Kennedy says, I'm drawing the line, so that's not going to be the issue. There'll be no slippery slope because of me, if the law stood on that basis, obviously you want to get backlash from the left. I don't know if you get backlash from the right if he's spelling out a narrowing of the Commerce Clause. Would that dampen the possible backlash effect on the right? I don't know, but obviously that would be the intent doing something like that. And I'm a little bit curious if there's going to be some Machiavellian hardball in the court chambers where a Roberts and or a Kennedy go to the liberal four and say, look, we want to narrow the Commerce Clause power. We've wanted to do this for a long time. And I don't want a ruling that is, a three-way split where you four say broad Commerce Clause, the other conservative three say strike the whole thing, and then Kennedy and I are taking this middle ground, because then our opinion doesn't carry the weight. So you four better get on board with our narrowing of the Commerce Clause, or we jump ship. And I doubt they'll be, that pointed in their discussions. They might speak in more of a genteel, coded language, but I would not be surprised if there is going to be some very tense back and forth with their drafts to see if they can get the liberal justices to come on board with a narrowing of the Commerce Clause.
Well, it will be interesting to see, and I think you're right. I mean, in the sense that nobody should be rooting or crying in their beer, assuming that we know what's going to happen.
Sorry, not yet.
We don't know. You want to call it a night, or do you want to hit another?
We can call it a night.
We always leave them wanting more, right?
I'm still under the great weight of parental sleep deprivation. So.
Are you going to go driving around again? I saw someone was getting on your case in the comments for not Ferberizing.
Well, it's too early to Ferber. The kid's only 6 weeks old. You Ferber. I think the earliest you can Ferber is at 3 months.
Okay.
And more
well, somebody was getting on your. Somebody in the comments was getting on your case about driving.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking. I'm just forgetting the situation. We're talking about our older child that I drive around for naps, and yes, Ferber does say you shouldn't do that. And I'm aware Ferber says you shouldn't do that, but we've tried all the other things, so you are what you are.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do.
But let me say for the record, she is otherwise Ferberized. She's Ferberized at night. I've achieved that much. I have some parental skill.
Excellent. Well, we are glad you were able to join us on this trip into the DMZ. And I do think that we talked about 2 hot-button issues without getting too worked up. What do you think?
I concur. Well done, sir.
Right back at you.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.